This is section 4.1, part A, sampling and surveying. Suppose we want to find out what % of young drivers in the United States text while driving. To answer this question, we will survey 16 to 20-year-olds who live in the United States and drive. Ideally, we would ask them all, which is called a census. But contacting every driver in this age group wouldn't be practical. It would take too much time and cost too much money. Instead, we want to question a sample chosen to represent the entire population of young drivers. So the population in a statistical study is the entire group of individuals about which we want information. A sample is the part of the population from which we actually collect information. We use information from a sample to draw conclusions about the entire population. The distinction between population and sample is basic to statistics. To make sense of any sample results, you must know what the population the sample represents. So we need to identify the population and the sample in each of the following settings. A furniture maker buys hardwood in large batches. The supplier is supposed to dry the wood before shipping. Wood that is not dry won't hold its size and its shape. The furniture maker chooses 5 pieces of wood from each batch and tests their moisture content. If any piece exceeds 12% moisture content, the entire batch is sent back. So in this case, the population is all the pieces of hardwood in the batch. The sample are the 5 pieces that are selected to be tested for their moisture content. Each week, the Gallup poll questions a sample of about 1,500 adult U.S. residents to determine national opinion on a wide variety of opinions. In this case, the Gallup's population is all adult U.S. residents, and their sample are the 1,500 adults who are actually going to respond to the survey questions. We often draw conclusions about a whole population on the basis of a sample. Have you ever tested a sample of ice cream and ordered a cone if the sample tastes good? Since ice cream is fairly uniform, the single taste represents the whole. Choosing a representative sample from a large and varied population, like all U.S. young adult drivers, is not so easy. So the first step is planning a sample survey, is to say exactly what population we want to describe. The second step is to say exactly what we want to measure. That is, to give exact definitions of our variables. We reserve the term sample survey for studies that use an organized plan to choose a sample that represents some specific population, like the pieces of hardwood or the U.S. adults in the previous example. By definition, the population in a sample survey can consist of people, animals, or things. Some people use the terms survey or sample survey to refer only to studies in which people were asked one or more questions, like the Gallup poll of the last example. The final step in planning a sample survey is to decide how to choose a sample from the population. Let's take a closer look at some good and not so good sampling methods. So the easiest, but not the best, sampling method is just to choose individuals who are close by. A sample selected by taking the members of a population they're easiest to reach is called a convenience sample. Convenience samples often produced unrepresentative data. The design of a statistical study shows bias if it systematically favors certain outcomes. So when you go to take this AP exam, if you're asked to describe how the design of a study leads to bias, you're expected to identify the direction of the bias. Suppose we were asked, explain how using a convenient sample of students in your statistics class to estimate the proportion of high school students who own a graphing calculator could result in bias. You might respond, this sample would probably include a much higher proportion of students with a graphing calculator than the population at large, because the graphing calculator is required for the statistics class. This is the method would probably lead to an overestimate of the actual population proportion. Convenience samples are almost guaranteed to show bias. So are voluntary response samples. A voluntary response sample consists of people who choose themselves to be responding to a general appeal. Voluntary response samples shows bias because people with strong opinions, often in the same direction, are more likely to respond. Write-in and call-in opinion polls are almost sure to lead to strong bias. In fact, only about 15% of the public has ever responded to a call-in poll, and these tend to be the same people who call radio talk shows. That's not a representative sample of the population as a whole. So former CNN commentator Lou Dobbs doesn't like illegal immigration. On his show, was largely devoted to attacking a proposal to offer driver's license to illegal immigrants. During the show, Mr. Dobbs invited his viewers to go to his website to vote on the question, would you be more or less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's license to illegal aliens? The results, 97% of the 7,350 people who voted by the end of the show said they were less likely to vote for that presidential candidate. What type of sample did Mr. Dobbs use in his poll, and explain how the sampling method could lead to bias in the poll results. So Mr. Dobbs used a voluntary response sample. People chose to go online and respond. Those who voted were viewers of Mr. Dobbs' program, which means they were likely to have the same view set that he did already. The 97% poll result is probably an extreme overestimate of the percent of people in the population who would be less likely to support a presidential candidate who had this opinion. So for each of the following situations, identify the sampling method used, then explain how the sampling method could lead to bias. A farmer brings a juice company several crates of oranges each week. A company inspector looks at 10 oranges from the top of each crate before deciding whether to buy all the oranges. This would be convenience sampling. This could lead him to think that oranges are better in quality than they actually are because the farmer could put all of the best oranges on the top. The ABC program Nightline once asked whether the United Nations should continue to have its headquarters in the United States. Viewers were invited to call one telephone number to respond yes and another for no. There was a charge for calling either number. More than 186,000 callers responded, and 67% of them said no. This would be voluntary response sampling. Only those who feel particularly strong about the issue are likely to respond, especially since they are going to be charged for their call. In this case, those who are happy that the United Nations has its headquarters in the United States already have what they want, so they are less likely to respond to the question.